Hello and welcome to this Telecoms.com webinar delivered in association with AIRCOM. In addition to seeking new spectrum in which to deploy LTE, operators are increasingly looking to existing bands as a means of supplementing coverage and capacity. One approach is to free up spectrum in bands that are already used for other services such as GSM and HSPA by refarming these existing bands. In a few moments, Fabrizio Martinez, who's Director of Consulting and Global Operations at AIRCOM International, is going to talk you through the nuts and bolts of costing LTE in terms of spectrum. But I'm going to first talk more broadly about the potential for refarming. Spectrum refarming must play a key role in enabling cost-effective LTE network migration. AIRCOM calculates that by reusing existing 2G and 3G spectrum for LTE, operators can make significant cost savings, extend the lifespan of existing spectrum assets for another 3 years, and reduce the amount of additional spectrum they require by up to a third. While significant, these benefits can only be realized if operators follow a careful planning process to minimize service degradation for existing 2G and 3G services. As you can see here, the main candidate bands for refarming in most regions of the world are the 900, 1800 and 2100 MHz bands, which are currently used through the GSM or 3G UMTS or HSPA. In North America, the bands are 800, 850 and 1900. The ones presently supporting services such as IDEN and CDMA can also be potentially repurposed to support LTE in the future. This chart here shows you the uses of spectrum by band, the available bandwidth and its purpose. And whilst the bulk of available spectrum for LTE lies at 1800 MHz and above, as is the case in Europe, it's generally accepted that for wide area coverage of mobile broadband services, the lower bands in the 800 and 900 MHz range are the more attractive. However, some indications from research done by Informa Telecoms and Media have found that of all the candidate bands for refarming, the 900 band is likely to see the lowest level of LTE deployments worldwide, representing just 3% of the global addressable market for LTE by 2016. Potentially more accessible as users migrate from 2G services to 3G, the 900 band has been proposed as an option for operators wanting to run LTE alongside GSM until such time as the 2G network can be shut down. In the interim, the use of an adaptive multi-rate speech codecs and associated techniques to increase the performance and spectral efficiency of existing Edge and GSM services can increase the capacity. However, those operators that have already refarmed their spectrum in the 900 band have greatly preferred to do so in order to extend the coverage of UMTS and HSPA. Such operators include Finland's Elisa, some operators in Australia that are using UMTS 900 for regional coverage to support UMTS at 2100, and operators in France where UMTS 900 is being rolled out to actually cover around 98% of the population. In the UK, mobile operator O2 started using the 900 band for 3G services in March. The operator has switched to UMTS 900 in London, saying it would deliver a 50% capacity increase compared with its current 2100 MHz network. The operator also confirmed it would roll out in further cities later this year. Competitor 3, which does not own any 900 spectrum, is claiming that this puts it at a competitive disadvantage in the market. In the Asia Pacific, UMTS 900 has already been deployed by AIS in Thailand and CSL in Hong Kong, and there is currently widespread interest in the use of the 1800 SDD band for LTE, although this band is expected to account for just 7% of the global addressable market for LTE subscriptions by 2016. That again is according to Informa. The 1800 band will see by far the highest level of adoption in Western Europe, followed by Asia Pacific, and to quite a far lesser degree Eastern Europe, Middle East and Africa. Bear in mind that we're only talking about refarmed spectrum here, so taking into account greenfield LTE deployments in new spectrum paints a picture of significant fragmentation. As you can see by this chart here, this is the number of operators launching and the core bands identified on the right. The 190 plus operators around the world that are expected to have launched LTE by the end of 2016 will together account for 370 separate deployments when broken down by spectrum band. The majority, around 97% of these LTE launches in the period between 2009 and the end of 2016, will be in one of the 8 core bands identified by Informa. Operators using the core bands can expect to see a faster uptake of LTE than in the underused bands due to an expected wider and faster availability of compatible devices. However, the growth profile for each of these bands will vary based on a range of factors that also includes the availability of spectrum, the size of the addressable subscription base, and the speed of adoption of LTE across different markets and in varying market conditions. These factors will have a major bearing on which bands are most rapidly and widely adopted. Operators will also have to set up their strategies for migrating GSM and edge services to another band, potentially 900, and implement refarming. Although moving directly to LTE is one option, there's evidence that at least one pan-European operator is considering an initial move to refarm UMTS and HSPA into the 1800 band in one or more markets, possibly for up to 5 years prior to implementing LTE. Such an approach has the advantage of providing additional 3G capacity while future LTE deployment plans are pending, and can be facilitated through the introduction of a single RAN technology capable of supporting GSM, UMTS, HSPA, and LTE, which is a step already being undertaken by a number of operators. This makes the step up to LTE at a future date not just easier, but also provides more flexibility as it can be introduced on a site-by-site basis. As well as refarming 1800 services to the 900 band, there's also evidence that operators are keen to migrate voice services at 1800 to the 2100 MHz UMTS band. In line with the high levels of smartphone adoption, it's possible that the increasing availability of UMTS devices will allow a gradual refarming of the 1800 band, freeing up capacity that can then be used for LTE in bandwidth alternatives of 5, 10 and 15 MHz, with the reuse of antennas, feeders and other site assets. The points that I've identified here were originally identified by the operator Elisa as part of an Informer investigation. Right, I'm going to hand over to Fabrizio in just a moment, but it's clear that refarming will have a significant role to play in freeing up spectrum for LTE, and the refarmed bands will together represent around 20% of the total addressable market for LTE by 2016, according to Informer's forecasts. The 1800 band is the most promising in terms of capacity and availability, and is attracting a groundswell of support from operators, vendors and industry bodies. However, regulatory issues coupled with unequal spectrum distribution and fragmentation mean that the refarming process is likely to be protracted in some markets. Operators will also need time to address the technical challenges associated with refarming. In addition, some operators are contemplating refarming UMTS in the 1800 band ahead of their deployment to LTE. If this trend gains wider support, then it could further delay the transition to LTE 1800. However, if coupled with the move towards a single RAN approach as being adopted by many operators, it could actually smooth out the transition to LTE and allow a phased and managed approach to LTE rollout in the refarmed bands. Refarming in the 900 band, meanwhile, is more likely to focus on extending coverage for UMTS, while the 2100 band may only have limited appeal outside of Japan, where NTT Docomo is an enthusiastic supporter. Refarming will be slower to take off in markets such as the US, where new spectrum is available for early LTE rollout. However, as the growth of legacy services such as CDMA begins to slow, refarming of these bands will actually become more possible. There's going to be an opportunity for you to ask Fabrizio questions after his presentation. You can ask them at any time during the webinar just by typing them into the text box beneath the video, and Fabrizio will get started on those when he's finished speaking. So now, Fabrizio, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you, James. The agenda for today is about refarming spectrum and how refarming is key to sustain the mobile investment. AIRCOM has been in the industry for the last 15 years, and we've been pretty much specialized ourselves in planning and optimization of networks. So what we're going to be covering in the next 25 minutes or so is our view on how spectrum plays a key role in sustaining mobile investment, given the economy and given new technologies coming into the market. So AIRCOM, as I said, has been in the industry for more than 15 years. We're pretty much located in the 5 continents, and we are established ourselves as the #1 leaders in wireless planning tools. We also cover the performance and management space, and recently we share with our customers our vision of our tools, and we name them iView. So iView is our vision for the future on how planning tools, performance management tool, configuration management tools will come together into a single environment. As I said before, we have 14 offices around the world. We work pretty much with the top 20 operators. We provide them software and consultancy services, and we are effectively, over 60% of the world's mobile operators as a customer base. The vision of the company is to be the trusted advisor and most valuable independent provider of network planning, optimization, and management software and consultancy for the mobile operators around the world. What we mean by that is that we help our partners and customers to solve any issues or challenges they're facing with their network. And obviously, with so many things happening today, there are plenty of things in the market. Before I start with the topic, I guess I have to mention my name and my role in AIRCOM. My name is Fabrizio Martinez, and I'm responsible for consulting global operations in the company. My role also has been to help operators around the world to understand the challenges that they will face when deploying new technologies, especially data technologies like HSPA Plus and LTE. Previously being the author of The Cost of LTE and similar topics like using HSPA Plus to leverage your investment in the network. And I would like to start with the cost of LTE as a starting point for the conversation of today. So basically, about 2 years ago, AIRCOM presented their vision on the cost of LTE. And what we said at that point was that depending on the path followed by operators, the cost will vary. And why is this key to the conversation we're having today? Effectively, one of the main aspects we highlighted at that point was the importance of the spectrum, the value of the spectrum, and how some of the operators will benefit from refarming the existing spectrum and saving effectively money on the deployment of these networks. A specific case that we used at that point was an operator in the Middle East region. So at that point we cover 4 different scenarios. One was a US operator having new spectrum in 700. Then there was a UK operator having new spectrum in 2.6 gigahertz. There was a Middle East operator effectively refarming or reusing the spectrum in the 2.1 band. And finally, an operator in APAC refarming the 900 band. What is interesting to see is how the cost of the spectrum will impact the deployment of the network through the years, and how operators can save capex by reusing their spectrum. Now, interesting is because, after 2 years, we've been delighted to see some of the results and some of the strategies that we mentioned 2 years ago as a vision. So effectively, 2 years after, it is a reality. Some of our customers, like the one we're going to use at the end, are reusing their spectrum to benefit from the savings. In this case, we're going to discuss at the end how an operator in the Middle East managed to refarm their 1800 spectrum in order to deploy their LTE capacity. 2 years ago, again, we discussed about the cost of LTE and how that will impact, different areas of the network. So in the slide, what we're showing here is, how the cost varies by region. So we have the US, the UK, Middle East, and APAC, and the different parts of the network, that being the UTRAN, which is the access network, the backhaul or transmission network, and the core network. As you can see, depending on the distribution, that might have a bigger impact or so. One thing that is not highlighted here, but we discussed in the cost of LTE was, again, the cost of a spectrum. So we're going to move into that in the coming slides. So what is the contribution of refarming? Why refarming becomes so important to the industry that we are, and to the mobile operators? Effectively, spectrum is one of the major costs when deploying a new network. And depending on the cost of the license, this can significantly impact the capability of the operator to finance the deployment of the network. Unfortunately, the industry had to learn from bad experiences, and back in 2000, when we were moving into 3G, many of our customers decided to gamble and bet enormous amounts of money into the cost of the license, and the price that we paid for that was effectively that 3G rollout slowed down in different countries because of the lack of investment. Now, as the industry moves in LTE, effectively we're suffering a similar situation where money is tired, the markets are closed, so we need to find ways to maximize the capex available for these operators. So spectrum is one of the major costs they need to have at the beginning of the rollout. The other thing we're seeing or experiencing in the market is the spectrum is becoming saturated. Those frequency bands that are relevant for the mobile industry are becoming saturated. We have GSM networks, we have UMTS networks, and we have all the technologies that effectively are using the capacity needed to provide into these networks. I guess, if we start talking about data growth, iPhones, smartphones, this is a topic that will not be new to the industry, but I think we just need to move on. We just need to accept that, data is growing, the iPhone is there, this is the post-iPhone era, and we just need to deal with the challenges that they have created, and obviously one of them is capacity in the networks. So back to the discussion we were having on spectrum. Spectrum will enable operators to grow. Spectrum will enable operators to transition to new technologies, and by that saying is LTE, LTE Advanced. And one thing that particularly catches my attention is that spectrum refarming will enforce, in a way, the migration to new technologies. Not only enable the implementations of new technologies, but by reusing existing spectrums, we force ourselves, or we force the industry to decommission legacy technologies. It's definitely, a concern having networks running GSM, UMTS, and now LTE at the same time. So sooner or later, as an industry, we're going to have to take the decision on who's going to be decommissioned first, whether that's a UMTS network, whether that's a GSM network. But, effectively by refarming this spectrum, we are forcing ourselves to do that decision and start decommissioning legacy technologies. Now, with that saying, there are a few challenges that we need to consider when refarming spectrum, and through the following slides I'm going to try to explain that to you. So what are the key steps based on our experience to go and refarm your spectrum? I guess the first key question you need to ask yourself if you're refarming a spectrum is how much spectrum is available. Do I have 5, 10, 15, 20 megahertz available? Is something that would vary depending on your situation. So one of the key things to answer yourself is how much spectrum I can afford to lose in my existing technology without compromising the service that I'm providing to my customers. What is definitely an issue is that traffic is not going to just go overnight into your new technology, so the traffic distribution is something you definitely need to consider when planning your refarming strategy. So how much of that traffic relies today on the spectrum that you're trying to refarm, and do you have any other available bands with any available technologies in order to balance the traffic? So it's not just a single exercise of deciding to refarm X amount of a spectrum, but also looking at the big picture of your network. You own a network. This network is effectively formed by different technologies, whether that's 2G, 3G, or 4G, and you need to get use of all of them the best possible in order to maximize the possibilities of success of your refarming. So that's kind of what other technologies are available in the network that you can use. 2G, 3G, as I said, or now something that is definitely relevant to everyone, I'm sure, is Wi-Fi offloading, and that takes us into head nets, and how we're going to, as an industry, work with these different layers of networks. So one, you have decided or you have considered, and you don't know the answer yourself. Obviously, you can get some support from, companies like us. The next step will be, have a plan of execution. When is the time of the year that you want to execute this plan? It has to be in line with your plans for LTE deployment, but also, any other major events that might impact the network through the year. It could be a seasonality event, that could be holidays if you're in a nice part of the world, or a major event like London next year and the Olympics. So that needs to be part of the refarming decision making when you are about to execute the plan. The reason I'm saying that is that from our experience, multiple customers have decided to refarm, and unfortunately, lack of internal communication puts the whole refarming exercise a little bit into jeopardy when you start your plans and then realize that you need to stop because of any major event in the network. So the next thing you need to consider is how much you're going to rely the refarming in the planning data that you have today. Is this accurate? Is this a true reflection of your network? And how much of the planning will be relying on measurement data? Obviously, the way that we're proposing refarming to happen is based on measurement data. It tends to be more accurate. It tends to reflect, the latest changes in the network. However, having a solid planning database is key also for the success of your refarming exercise. So, accuracy of your database before you go into the exercise of refarming is definitely another key box to tick before you move into the implementation. One thing that a lot of our customers have been surprised is the collection period. How much does it take to collect measurement data from the network? And it varies by vendor, so it's not one size fits all, and I'll give you an answer that will fit every single network and every single of you in this call. But effectively, the collection period changes depending on the network, the release that you're using, and specific things of your network topology, neighbor definition, and all the technologies that you might have that will impact the final outcome. So collection period needs to be defined clearly. Again, otherwise, you go into implementation and you get surprises. Another key step during the refarming exercise is obviously, the creation of your frequency plan and the strategy that you will be using. What sort of a strategy is available to you, any features that you need to implement in the network before the new frequency plan is implemented that would allow you to maximize, the spectrum and maximize the reuse of frequencies you have. Once you have go through that list, it's important that all of those features are available, implemented and tested before we move into the refarming exercise. Once we move into the refarming exercise, I guess the most critical part of the whole project is implementation of the new frequency plan. That can be effectively, the part where you made this whole exercise a success, or whether you effectively create more problems into your network. It's always recommendable that you have an audit of the network, which will give you an idea what would be the performance once you implement the new plan. So that can be somehow anticipated based on the spectrum available, the spectrum that you're trying to refarm, the KPIs of the existing network, and the traffic distribution in your network. So once you have gone through the implementation period, obviously you need to be prepared. The next day you do the implementation tends to be quite hectic, quite busy in terms of, spotting any major issues that have been created in any particular areas, and hopefully, the first day they will be resolved, and then you can move into what we call a period of stabilization of the network, which tends to be, anything between 2 to 4 weeks, where some sort of fine-tuning and post-optimization will be done. Why? First day that you implement your plan, you will suffer changes based on the traffic patterns of your network, and that will be reflected in your KPIs. Any decision making that you need to make needs to be normally after 2-3 weeks that you've implemented the plan, because you need to wait for KPIs to settle down effectively. So you've gone through this exercise for a reason, and that main reason are the possible savings that you can get out of a spectrum refarming. So what are the possible savings that you could get? Recently, we shared with all of you through the media what we thought was a good indicator of the possible savings that you could have by doing this into your LTE rollout. And what we did is look into the cost of spectrum license recently acquired in places like North America and Europe, the price that operators paid for that amount of a spectrum, and we compare that versus the cost of implementing a spectrum refarming exercise into the network. And some of the conclusions that we found was that, for a fraction of the cost of the new spectrum, you would be able to implement your refarming exercise into the network. And having said that, one of the things that we highlighted at that point was that by refarming, you shouldn't stay away of buying the spectrum, but by refarming, you could save money by deferring the investment or also by buying less spectrum than anticipated. And one of the scenarios that we run was the possibility of refarming, 5 megahertz or 10 megahertz of existing spectrum in order to provide you with a capacity for LTE for the next 2-3 years. And by deferring that investment or by deferring the amount of spectrum that you need, effectively making savings into the network. So again, the savings that we found were quite significantly, and it could count through the life of the network up to 30% of your capex investment, given, again, the cost of the spectrum and the possibility to delay that investment into the network. So moving to the real world, case study, operators in the Middle East, they decided they had to accelerate themselves into LTE. However, the licenses were not available. So they raised this challenge to the partners: how can we make this possible? And the different frequencies they had available was the 900 spectrum, the 1800 spectrum, and the 2.1 spectrum. So many of you might think, okay, the 900 is the immediate answer. However, the amount of spectrum available for this particular operator will make very difficult to make enough space for an LTE deployment without compromising the quality of the network in the 900 spectrum. Then we move into the 1800 spectrum, and the 1800 spectrum became pretty much, after a few weeks of looking into it, the spectrum that was more feasible to be refarmed. The main reason why 1800 came as a possibility to be refarmed was the reassurance from the industry and from the vendors of having an ecosystem in 1800, something that at that point we couldn't confirm for the 2.1 megahertz spectrum, which was also available, and therefore, the 1800 spectrum became the de facto option. One of the key things and challenges that the operator presented to us was that they did not want to compromise the quality of the network by implementing, the LTE 1800. I guess that's everyone's dream, of being able to reduce the spectrum without compromising the network. That was a very high task for anyone, but we decided to take it and look at the different possibilities on how to implement this. And after, different trials and recommendations and features we could use and techniques we could use to implement the new frequency plan, the team on the ground were able to work on the refarming strategy for one of the major markets and implement, with the support of the operator and the vendors, a new frequency plan. And it was pretty much a success. After the implementation, KPIs were restored to pre-refarming implementation levels just after 2 days of making the new frequency plan. And you need to keep in mind that it was a high task given the amount of traffic that the 1800 megahertz band was supporting. And this was, I would say, a success because, the operator, the vendor, and AIRCOM took the time to go through the checklist that I just shared with you, which was, what were the key steps and how do we make this implementation successful. We also rely on technology available for us in AIRCOM like AIQ. AIQ is our intelligent optimization product, that will allow the optimization team to collect measurements from any vendor. So it's a multi-vendor platform able to collect data from the network, post-process the data, analyze the data, and come up with a frequency plan, neighbor plan, and power plan that you should be able to implement into the network by minimizing the impact on the KPIs. So we're reaching the end of this presentation, and I'd like to thank everyone for your time. I hope you find the information that we're sharing with you useful, and obviously I wish you success in any projects you take about refarming your own spectrum. I think it will definitely improve the use of the resources we have available today, and is something that will save operators money in the short and in the long term. Having said that, thanks again for your time. I'm going to stay online to answer any questions that you might have, and I'm going to pass the microphone again back to James. So thanks for your time.
Thanks very much, Fabrizio, for your insights. As I mentioned earlier, Fabrizio is now going to be available to take your questions for a short time. If you haven't asked questions yet, please type them into the text box beneath the main webinar